All right, ready to jump into another deep dive. Today we're taking a closer look at Finolex Cables and their Q2 FY25 results. They're a pretty major player in the Indian manufacturing scene.
Yeah, they're practically the backbone of India's electrical and communications infrastructure. Wiring up everything from homes and businesses to even vehicles.
Definitely. And their latest results are pretty interesting, wouldn't you say? They seem to be balancing some impressive growth, but also facing some headwinds, giving us a real-time glimpse into how companies are navigating the current economic climate.
Exactly. It's a bit of a mixed bag, really.
That's why we're digging in today. We've got their official press release to work with, their detailed financial statements filed with the stock exchange, and, of course, our own list of questions.
Yeah, we always come prepared. These sources should give us a pretty solid 360-degree view, not just the numbers themselves, but the strategic thinking behind them.
Absolutely. So first things first, revenue's up, like significantly.
Oh, yeah, a solid 10% year over year. That puts them at a cool Rs. 1311.7 crore for this quarter.
Which is not insignificant considering the overall economic climate. Makes you wonder what's driving that kind of growth, right?
Right. Well, if you look closer, their volume of optic fiber cables is up a whopping 53%. That tells me they're really betting on the future of digital communication in India.
It's almost like they're, I don't know, laying the groundwork for a more connected India. Literally. And speaking of groundwork, they've got this e-beam facility that's almost ready to launch.
Right, right. For those who might not know, it uses electron beams, highly focused ones, to modify the properties of materials.
Making them more durable, higher performing.
Exactly. Cutting-edge stuff for their cable production.
Yeah.
But they're still waiting on those final regulatory approvals, though.
Yeah. Gotta dot the I's and cross the T's. Still, shows they're committed, right? They're not just thinking about the now. They're investing in tech that'll give them an edge down the line.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And let's not forget about their preform facility, which is also nearing completion. That'll give them the capacity to manufacture those glass preforms, the ones that are essential for making optic fiber.
So it's all about vertical integration, controlling more of their supply chain, potentially reducing costs in the long run. Smart.
Very smart. But not everything's all sunshine and roses. Their profit after taxes actually dipped this quarter.
Yeah, down 12% compared to last year, down to ours 146.1 crore.
Right. And this is where those economic headwinds we talked about earlier really start to show their impact.
Like those lower copper prices. Great for consumers, but not necessarily for manufacturers like Finolex.
Right. Plus, they're dealing with some leftover high-cost inventory from previous quarters when prices were higher. So those costs are eating into their profits now.
Ouch. And a lot of businesses are being cautious about restocking right now, which are probably impacting sales as well.
Yeah, definitely a factor. And then, on top of all that, they decided to lower their selling prices.
Which I imagine affects their profit margin, at least for the short term.
It does. But it's also a strategic move. They're choosing to stay competitive, maybe even gain some market share. Even if it means taking a hit on those profits right now, they're playing the long game.
Okay, so we've got this interesting contrast. Growth in some areas, but challenges impacting profits. Now, what about their financial statements? Can you break down their business segments for us?
Sure. The statements break down their revenue by category. Electrical cables are still their main event, bringing in the lion's share.
Their bread and butter, as they say.
Exactly. But communication cables are on the rise, which reflects that whole investment in optic fiber we talked about. And then there's this others category that I find intriguing. It covers their trading activities, like trading electrical goods and other stuff.
Ah, right. The trading side of the business. I wonder how much that contributes to their overall revenue.
It's a good question. Gives us a peek into their diversification strategy. Are they using this trading arm to, offset risks associated with the cable market? Or is it a completely separate growth avenue? Something to look into for sure.
Absolutely. All right, let's switch gears a bit and get to some of those more in-depth questions we prepared. First one on my mind. How are their operating costs looking compared to previous quarters?
Well, to really answer that, we need to dive into those financial statements. Look at things like their expense ratios. For example, what's their cost of materials as a percentage of revenue?
Right. Is it going up? Which might indicate they're dealing with those high input costs we talked about earlier.
Exactly. We can also compare their current cost of materials to previous quarters and see if there's a trend.
And while we're talking costs, are they actively doing anything specific to manage them in this rather unpredictable market? Are they tightening their belts, so to speak?
Well, the financial statements can definitely shed some light on that. We can look at things like employee benefits, administrative expenses, any areas where they might be cutting back, and the management discussion and analysis section of their report. That might even explicitly mention any specific cost-saving initiative they put in place.
Okay, so we're starting to get a more nuanced picture of their financial situation, clearly making strategic moves for the future, but also grappling with some real challenges in the present.
Yeah, definitely a bit of a balancing act. And that brings us to another question. How's their product portfolio changing? And I don't just mean adding those consumer goods.
Right, right. We know about the switches, the LEDs, fans, even water heaters. But are there any changes within their core cable offerings that might be contributing to these results?
That's what we need to find out. We need to analyze the product-wise breakdown of their revenue. Are they shifting focus within their cable lines, maybe specializing in certain types or introducing new ones to meet specific market demands? That's where the real story is.
It's like they're trying to find that sweet spot between what the market needs today and what it'll need 5, 10 years down the road.
Precisely. And a big part of understanding their strategy is figuring out how they're positioning themselves within the Indian market. How they're going to grab a larger share.
All right, so we've covered their revenue growth, the profit dip, their investments, their product strategy. Now I'm curious, how do you see all of this connecting to the bigger economic picture in India?
Well, the Indian economy is a bit of a beast. It's incredibly complex. Infrastructure development, government policies, global trends, all of those things play a role.
And the cable industry is pretty intertwined with all of that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Being such a key component of infrastructure and industrial activity, it's deeply connected to those broader forces.
So what does Finolex's performance, good and bad, tell us about the state of these sectors in India?
Well, their revenue growth, especially in optic fiber, that suggests there's still a strong demand in sectors like construction and telecommunications.
Yeah.
But the dip in profit, that hints at some underlying pressures.
Like those fluctuating input costs? Maybe some softening in consumer spending?
Could be. It's like their story is a microcosm of what's happening in the larger economy, reflecting both opportunities and challenges.
That makes a lot of sense. It also raises another question. What does this all mean for their financial health? Do they have the capacity to keep investing and expanding?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? To answer that, we need to look beyond just the profit dip. We need to analyze their overall financial stability.
So things like cash flow, debt levels, return on equity.
Exactly. Those metrics will paint a much clearer picture of their overall financial health. Their ability to weather these economic storms and continue on that path of growth.
All right, so we've unpacked a lot about their performance, but there's one element we haven't touched on yet. The dividend they recently paid out to investors.
Ah, yes. Their financial statements show they paid a dividend of Rs. 8 per share earlier this year. That's a pretty significant payout.
It is, and it seems to signal that they're confident in their financial position, confident in their future.
Like they're saying, hey, we're in it for the long haul, and we believe we can deliver value.
Exactly, balancing those short-term challenges with building for the future. Now, let's zoom out even further. How does Finolex stack up against its competitors in the Indian cable industry? Where do they fit in that landscape?
Well, unfortunately, our sources don't offer a direct comparison. But we can make some educated guesses.
Okay, let's speculate responsibly then.
Their emphasis on innovation, their expansion of production capacity, and their move to diversify their product line. All that suggests they're responding to competitive pressures. They're trying to, at the very least, maintain your market share, if not expand it.
It's a strategic chess match, isn't it? Trying to anticipate your opponent's moves while planning your own.
Exactly. And in a market as dynamic and fast-paced as India's, agility is key. Speaking of challenges, let's revisit those risks Finolex is facing. What are they doing to mitigate those?
Good point. Let's dive back into that.
Well, their press release mentions price adjustments as a way to address the whole margin squeeze. But to really understand their full risk management strategy, we need those financial statements, the management commentary. We need to dig deeper.
So things like inventory management techniques, how they're handling the fluctuating copper prices, maybe even diversifying their suppliers.
All of that. Those are all smart moves for navigating a volatile market. And then there's the whole question of sustainability and innovation. How do those factors fit into Finolex's current financial picture?
That's an interesting angle. Our sources don't explicitly detail their sustainability efforts, but their investment in these modern facilities, their push toward energy efficient products like LEDs, that suggests they are moving toward a more sustainable model.
It's becoming increasingly crucial for companies, to incorporate sustainability into their core strategy for both ethical reasons and because consumers are demanding it.
Absolutely. Okay, last question from our list. What are the key initiatives Finolex is undertaking to make sure they keep growing in the coming quarters?
Well, that ongoing capacity expansion is definitely key. Got to be able to meet that future demand, especially in those high-growth areas like optic fiber. And their diversification strategy, both within their cable lines and into consumer products, that's all about spreading risk, opening up new revenue streams.
Not putting all their eggs in one basket, so to speak.
Exactly. And then there's their commitment to innovation, right? Those new facilities, the push into optic fiber tech, all of that combined with a careful approach to managing costs and a keen understanding of the market, that seems to be the foundation of their growth strategy.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. Analyzed Phenolex's financial performance from various angles. We've seen their revenue gains, their profit struggles, their strategic investments, their diversification efforts, their overall financial health.
Yeah, we even tied their performance to the broader Indian economy and looked at where they stand amongst their competitors.
They're a company trying to balance growth with the challenges of a constantly changing market. And their commitment to expansion, to diversification, to staying ahead of the curve in areas like optic fiber. It paints a pretty compelling picture for the future, wouldn't you say?
It does, but those challenges, things like those fluctuating input costs, cautious consumers, a competitive market, those aren't going away anytime soon.
True. Ultimately, whether Phenolics finds that right balance for long-term success, that remains to be seen. But they're definitely a company worth keeping an eye on.
No doubt about it. Now, we need to look at how all of this translates to the stock market. What does it all mean for investors?
All right, before we jump into that, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back to unpack that final piece of the Phenolics puzzle. Don't go anywhere.
So we've established, right, that Finolex is, facing some headwinds, but they're also making some pretty strategic moves for the future. The question is, how does the market perceive all of this?
Right, because a company's stock performance, that's not always a direct reflection of their current financials. There's a lot more at play, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Investors, they're always looking ahead, trying to predict those future earnings, the growth potential. So things like Finolex's investments, that expansion into like high growth areas, stuff like optic fiber, and their move into consumer goods, that could signal a pretty positive trajectory to investors.
Potentially outweighing that short-term profit dip.
Exactly. It all comes down to their growth trajectory, right? Their
Yeah.
ability to capitalize on those emerging opportunities.
Yeah.
Of course, investors, they're also going to be scrutinizing those financial statements, looking for strong cash flow, healthy debt management, a solid return on equity.
Those are all critical indicators of a company's, financial stability, their ability to generate value for shareholders. But even with strong fundamentals, a company's stock can still be influenced by external factors.
Of course, of course. The broader market sentiment plays a huge role. Things like economic conditions, interest rates, overall investor confidence in the Indian manufacturing sector, all of that impacts how a company's stock is valued.
So it's this interplay, this complex interplay of internal performance and these external market forces that ultimately shapes how investors view a company.
That's it. And that's precisely why it's so crucial to look at the whole picture, not just, focus on any single piece of data in isolation.
All right, so bringing it back to Finolex,
hmm
given everything we've discussed, the profit dip, the investments, the diversification, what's your overall assessment of their financial health, their ability to navigate all these challenges?
Hmm. Well, the strong revenue performance, those continued investments, that suggests they're in a relatively good position. But they're definitely going to need to manage those input costs, that inventory carefully. Make sure those short-term challenges don't, derail their long-term plans.
So a cautious optimism.
I think that's a fair assessment. They're making the right moves strategically, but it's the execution, you know, their ability to adapt to this ever-changing market. That's going to be key.
Okay. We've covered a ton of ground today, analyzing Phenolex's financial performance, their strategic decisions, even those stock market implications.
We've seen a company balancing growth with challenges, innovation with adaptation, all within, the context of the Indian economy, which is constantly in motion.
And while their future trajectory it's still a bit uncertain, their story definitely provides some valuable insights into the forces that are shaping those manufacturing and technology sectors, not just in India, but globally.
It's a good reminder that even in a world of constant change, those companies that embrace innovation, carefully manage those risks, and adapt to those evolving market conditions, those are the ones that can really position themselves for enduring success.
Okay, before we completely wrap up, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier. Finolex's expansion into those consumer goods. The switches, the LEDs, the fans, even water heaters. What's your take on that diversification strategy? Is it a smart move or a bit of a risky distraction?
Honestly, I think it's a bit of both. On one hand, it allows them to tap into that growing consumer market in India, potentially like mitigate some of the risk that comes with relying solely on the cable industry. Plus, it could open up, those new revenue streams,
Hmm.
boost their overall profitability.
Show potential for growth, for stability.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's also that risk of spreading themselves too thin. Entering a new market like that, it requires a lot of investment, a lot of expertise. They're going to need to make sure they have the resources, the capabilities to really compete in that consumer goods space while also, not neglecting their stronghold in the cable market.
It's a balancing act, isn't it? They have to make sure that expansion it complements their core business, doesn't detract from it.
Exactly. It's all going to depend on how well they understand that consumer market, their ability to build a strong brand presence, their ability to manage the complexities that come with a more diverse product portfolio.
It's definitely something to watch over these next few quarters. Could be a game changer for them if they pull it off. But if they stumble, well, that could really put a strain on their resources.
Agreed. Bold move. Lots of potential reward, but also some pretty significant risks. Only time will tell how it all plays out.
All right. Shifting gears a bit, we talked about the challenges of those fluctuating copper prices. How do companies like Finolex typically deal with that kind of volatility? Any strategies they can use to mitigate the impact?
Oh, absolutely. There are actually several ways companies can try to manage this kind of risk. One pretty common approach is hedging, where they use financial instruments to sort of lock in a certain price for copper in the future, protects them from those sudden price swings.
So it's like insurance against that price volatility.
That's a great way to put it. Another strategy is to diversify their supplier base, sourcing copper from multiple sources, reduces their reliance on any one particular supplier, maybe even helps them negotiate better prices.
Spreading the risk, as they say.
Exactly. And then there's always the option of passing some of those price increases on to customers. Of course, that can be tricky, might impact their competitiveness.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. They need to protect their margins, but they also need to stay competitive.
You got it. And the best approach, it really depends on a whole bunch of factors.
Yeah.
The company's size, their market position, their overall risk tolerance.
Okay, let's talk innovation. We highlighted Finolex's investment in optic fiber, but what other innovations are, shaping the cable industry right now? What else is out there?
Oh, there's a lot happening. One big area of focus is developing cables that are more energy efficient,
Hmm.
more environmentally friendly. As the world becomes more aware of sustainability, that demand for those types of cables is just growing and growing.
So it's not just about performance anymore. It's about sustainability too.
Exactly. And then you have the whole development of smart cables. These are cables with built-in sensors that can monitor things like temperature, vibration, even electrical current flow.
Wow, so they're not just transmitting data or power. They're providing information about the systems they're connected to.
Right. And that data can be used for all sorts of things: predictive maintenance, improving efficiency, even enhancing safety.
Sounds like the future of cables is, well, it's about being smarter, more efficient, more sustainable.
Absolutely. And the companies that embrace these trends, those are the ones that are going to thrive in the long run.
Okay, last question for you. We've talked a lot about, their financial performance, their strategic decisions, but what about the people behind those numbers? What's your impression of their leadership? Their ability to guide the company through these challenges, these opportunities?
Well, our sources don't really give us a deep dive into the personalities or the leadership styles of the executives at Finolex,
Hmm?
but we can kind of infer some things based on, the company's actions, that willingness to invest in innovation, their commitment to expansion, that move into new markets. All of that suggests a leadership team that's forward thinking. adaptable.
Not afraid to take risks, to make bold moves.
Right. And their focus on cost management, efficiency, that suggests a more pragmatic approach to running the business.
So it's a combination of vision and pragmatism.
Exactly. And that's often a winning formula in the business world.
Hmm.
Of course, true leadership, it's also about, inspiring your team, motivating them, fostering a culture of innovation, navigating those complex internal dynamics.
And those are things we just can't fully assess from our current sources.
That's right. But based on what we can see, their leadership, it seems to be steering the company in the right direction.
Okay, before we wrap up completely, I want to touch on one more thing. We discussed the challenges Finolex is facing, but what about those bigger, those more existential threats, the ones that could really impact their business, in the long run? Any trends or disruptors on the horizon that they need to be prepared for?
It's a really good question. One potential threat, one that's, looming out there, is the rise of wireless technologies. As wireless connectivity becomes more and more widespread, more reliable, eventually, it could start to reduce the demand for those traditional wired networks.
So you're saying cables could become obsolete.
It's not an immediate threat, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Another potential disruptor is the emergence of new materials, new manufacturing processes. For example, the development of graphene-based cables. That could really revolutionize the industry, offer superior performance, efficiency compared to those traditional copper or fiber optic cables.
So Finolex, they really need to stay ahead of that innovation curve, stay competitive.
Absolutely. Can't afford to get complacent.
Yeah.
They need to be constantly, scanning the horizon, anticipating those future trends, investing in research and development, staying ahead of the game.
And that brings us to our final takeaway for this deep dive. Finolex is, well, they're a company at a crossroads, facing those immediate challenges, but also making those strategic moves for the future. Their success, it's really going to depend on their ability to navigate these competing forces, to adapt to this changing market, and to innovate relentlessly.
Well said. It's a fascinating case study. How companies can balance those short-term pressures with, those long-term aspirations.
It's a good reminder that in the business world, there are no guarantees. Even established players, companies like Finolex, they need to evolve. They need to adapt to survive, to thrive.
Couldn't agree more. And that's what makes it so interesting to watch and see how it all unfolds.
All right, so we've really explored a lot about Finolex Cables, haven't we? Their financials, their strategic decisions, how they're viewed in the stock market. It's pretty clear they're at a pivotal point.
Yeah, definitely a turning point. Trying to juggle those immediate pressures, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
managing those costs, that inventory.
Yeah.
But at the same time, making those big moves for the future. The expansion into consumer goods, investing in all that innovation.
And that raises a pretty big question for anyone interested in Finolex, whether they're, thinking about investing or just following the business world. What should we be watching for? What's going to tell us if they're really on that path to long-term success?
Well, there are a few things I'd be keeping an eye on personally. First, how well are they managing those cost challenges?
Yeah.
Do their margins start to improve as they work through that high cost inventory? Adjust to those copper prices that just won't stay put.
So it's not just about revenue, it's about profitability, right?
Oh, no. Exactly. And then there's that whole expansion into consumer goods. How quickly can they really gain some traction in that market? Are they building a strong brand? Can they actually compete with those big players that are already there?
It's a gamble, isn't it? High stakes, big potential rewards, but also some pretty significant risks if they don't execute it properly.
For sure. For sure. And we can't forget about their bread and butter, their core cable business. How are they responding to the competition in that market? Are they keeping that market share, growing it even? Are they staying ahead of all that innovation?
They've got to keep adapting, keep evolving, even when they're already a leader.
Absolutely. And finally, I'd be looking for any signs that they're preparing for those disruptors, the ones we talked about, the wireless stuff, the new materials coming out. Are they putting money into research, into development? Are they looking at partnerships, maybe even acquisitions to boost their capabilities?
So it's not just about, reacting to those immediate challenges. It's about having that long-term vision, making decisions today to set themselves up for success down the road.
That's it. That's the sign of a company that's truly resilient. truly adaptable.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to consider today. We went deep into Finolex Cables,
Yeah.
their finances, their strategy, the competitive landscape, even what it all means for investors. We've seen a company trying to balance growth with challenges, innovation with adaptation, and all of it within that incredibly dynamic Indian economy.
And while it's hard to say for certain what the future holds for them, their story gives us a lot of valuable insight into those forces that are shaping the manufacturing sector, the tech sector, not just in India but around the world.
Mm.
It's a reminder that even in a world that's constantly changing,
Mm.
companies that embrace innovation, manage those risks, adapt to the market, they're the ones that can set themselves up for real lasting success.
That's a great point to end on. And as always, we encourage you to, go back to those source materials, dig a little deeper yourself, and come to your own conclusions about Finolex cables and what the future holds for them. Until next time, keep diving deep.